Hey guys, tonight we're heading somewhere damp, dimly lit, and faintly smelling of cabbage stew, left too close to the radiator. You're standing in a narrow hallway of a Soviet apartment block, the kind where the walls sweat in summer and the pipes clank in winter. It's bath night. You know this because a neighbor's voice has just floated through the door, reminding you, in that friendly but slightly threatening tone, that your slot is at 7:15, and you'd better be ready because the next family will be waiting. You probably won't survive this in your modern sensibilities, but back then, survival wasn't about comfort. It was about cue discipline. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know, post in the comments your location and local time right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You gather your towel threadbare, the edges curling like old parchment, and shuffle down the hall. The bathtub is already half full from the last person's turn. The water is a pale, ambiguous color, somewhere between weak tea and the memory of weak tea. You try not to think about the fact that it's been reheated several times over the evening on the small coal-fired water heater. Each new bather stepping in, swirling the water with their soap and skin, and then stepping out, leaving you their warmth and whatever else they carried in. Historians still argue whether Soviet communal bathing schedules were a matter of pure necessity or also a kind of unintended social bonding experiment. But standing here with your toes curling at the edge, you feel it's mostly necessity. The air in the bathroom is thick. Steam clings to your face like a damp cloth, carrying with it the sense of cheap lye soap, and whatever perfume your upstairs neighbor dabbed on hours ago. That perfume now mingles with the faint whiff of boiled potatoes from the communal kitchen down the hall. You breathe shallowly, which doesn't help much. You step in, your foot sinking into water that's no longer hot, but not yet cold, a temperature best described as lukewarm optimism. There's a bar of soap resting on the ledge. It's beige, misshapen, and has the faint sheen of having been used by several hands before yours. You rub it between your palms, trying not to think about the thin layer of someone else's skin cells now dissolving into the foam. The soap smells faintly medicinal, a kind of utilitarian scent that says, "We made this from whatever was available, and you'll like it because there's no alternative." You run the lather up your arms, watching faint clouds form in the water. It's a losing battle, this idea of cleaning yourself in shared water, but there's a certain resignation to it. The way you might clean a countertop with a sponge that's already suspiciously gray. As you sit back, knees sticking out, you remember that in some places during this era, bathhouses served entire neighborhoods, long tiled halls with rows of tubs, or sometimes no tubs at all, just showers with flimsy curtains. Women would line up, towels over their arms, chatting about work, children, and the latest rumor about bread deliveries, all while steam curled around them like cigarette smoke in a cafe. In some regions, the lack of private baths meant weekly visits to such places, where privacy was traded for efficiency, and the shared experience made the idea of personal space feel like a Western indulgence. You take the metal cup hanging from the tap and pour water over your shoulders, each splash sending ripples across the surface. The ripples bounce back, carrying tiny flecks of something soap, lint, that weren't there a moment ago. Or maybe you just didn't notice them until now. You reach for the loofah, a rough, fibrous disc that looks more suited to scrubbing floors. It's stiff against your skin, leaving faint red marks. You wonder how many times it's been used. How many people before you thought the same thing and shrugged. One of the quirks you've heard about from old-timers is the way families would rank the bath order. The youngest kids went first, when the water was cleanest, followed by the adults, and finally the grandparents, who often insisted they didn't mind. The reality was more about practicality. Grandparents had lived through worse, including times when water itself was a luxury. They could handle a bit of sediment. Some even claimed the seasoned water was better for the skin. Whether they believed it or just said it to keep the peace is something historians still debate. You lean back, closing your eyes for a moment, listening to the distant sounds of the building. A door slams. Footsteps echo in the stairwell. Someone's radio plays a faint ballad from another apartment, the tinny speaker making the singer's voice sound like it's coming from the bottom of a well. There's a kind of comfort in it, these shared noises, these signals that life is happening all around you, even as you're here, submerged in a bath that has seen more occupants than a public bench. A drop of water falls from the ceiling pipe onto your shoulder, startling you. You look up to see a slow leak, the kind that's been on the list for months, but never quite fixed. The water is cold, and you wonder if it's clean or if it's taken a scenic route through the building's innards. You shrug. It's just one more thing in a long list of things you've learned to ignore. Somewhere in the building's history, you imagine, there must have been a day when everyone got hot water at once, and people luxuriated in it. Steam pouring from open windows into the frosty night air. Maybe there was laughter, the sound of splashing, someone humming as they rinsed their hair. But tonight, like most nights, you work quickly, conscious of the time slot. There's no clock in here, but you can feel the minutes slipping by, your turn almost over. The neighbor after you, an older woman with sharp elbows and a sharper tongue, is already hovering outside, her slippers making soft scuffs against the hallway linoleum. You know if you linger, she'll knock, and the knock won't be polite. You rinse your hair, well, rinse is generous, given the water's condition, and wring it out over the tub. The strands cling to your fingers, and you can't help but think of the many other strands this tub has seen today. You stand, water streaming down your legs, and reach for the towel. It's not much more absorbent than a bedsheet, but it does the job well enough. As you wrap it around yourself, you feel the air hit your damp skin, carrying with it the mingled scents of soap, steam, and someone's dinner. You step out, your feet leaving wet prints on the cracked tile. Out in the hall, the older woman sweeps past you without a word, her own towel slung like a sash. eyes fixed on the door as if she's been waiting for this moment all day. You return to your small room where the air is cooler and the single bulb casts a yellowish glow. You sit on the edge of your bed, still damp, your hair dripping onto the worn blanket. There's a certain irony in feeling cleaner after such a bath. You know, logically, you're probably carrying just as many new germs as you washed away. But there's also a small satisfaction in having claimed your slot, in having participated in this quiet ritual that's been going on for decades in places like this. It's not glamorous, not even truly hygienic by modern standards, but it's a piece of life that shaped people's routines, their patience, their tolerance for imperfection. You think about how different it is now, how you can turn a tap and have hot water on demand, how you can soak in clean bubbles for as long as you like without worrying that someone else is pacing outside your door. But there's a strange charm to the memory. Even as you sit here, cooling off, the faint imprint of the loofah still tingling on your skin. Somewhere in another building just like this one, someone else is stepping into their own tepid bath, soap in hand, ready to make the best of it. And somehow, that makes you smile, just a little. You're still drying off from your turn in the tub when you remember the other part of your weekly hygiene routine, the one that isn't really scheduled so much as dictated by how many clean underthings you have left. And right now, the drawer is a barren landscape. Maybe one pair folded in the back that's technically clean, but the elastic has given up like a worn-out border guard at the end of his shift. You glance at the drying line strung over the radiator. Nothing, just yesterday's stockings, sagging in defeat, which means you're entering what could be called the week-long underwear gamble. It's not entirely your fault. Laundry in this time and place isn't a matter of tossing things into a sleek machine with the push of a button. No, here you either queue for hours at a communal wash tub in the basement, assuming you can get hot water, or you hunch over a bucket in your room, working up a lather with soap that leaves your hands raw. And sometimes, when it's 20 below outside and the only water that will come from the tap is cold enough to sting your bones, you improvise. Airing out becomes a legitimate washing method, at least by local standards. You hang a pair in the open window for a few hours, hoping the wind will do something magical. Whether it's effective or just wishful thinking is something historians still debate. You pick up the pair you wore yesterday. They've got that slight lived-in feel softened, yes, but also with a faint memory of the day still clinging to them. You stretch the fabric between your hands, inspecting for any suspicious marks, and give them a quick sniff. The result: let's just say the window option is looking appealing. You drape them over the sill, letting the frosty night air slap at them for a while. There's a quiet resignation to all this. You're not alone. Most women in your building are doing the same thing. There's no shame in it, because shame requires the existence of a better alternative. In fact, you've noticed that fresh is a sliding scale. On day 1, fresh means crisp, clean, just off the line. By day 4, fresh means smells less than my neighbor's cooking. And by day 6, fresh is, if I keep moving, no one will notice. You remember your neighbor Galena telling you about her time working at a textile factory, where she'd swap underwear with her sister halfway through the week. Not in some formal, labeled system, just a quick exchange at the end of the day, with both pretending the swap was a form of laundering. Whether this was thrift or simply an act of solidarity is unclear, though Galena swore it made the fabric feel reset. That's one way to put it. Pull open your small dresser drawer, which squeaks like a mouse in distress, and take stock. One pair has a rip along the seam that could probably be fixed if you could find your sewing kit. Another is so faded you can't tell what color it started as. Somewhere in the back, there's the fancy pair you save for special occasions, though the idea of wearing them in winter, under 3 layers of wool, seems like a waste. Besides, if they get wet while drying in this cold, they'll turn into stiff little fabric boards. The smell of wet laundry from another room drifts in. It's oddly comforting soap, damp cotton, and that sharp metallic scent of water from old pipes. Someone's humming as they work over a basin. You picture them wringing out each piece by hand, knuckles reddening in the cold, the floor underfoot splashed with puddles that will take hours to dry. There's something almost meditative about it, if you don't think too hard about the frost creeping along the inside of the window. Back on your own line, the pair you hung out is starting to stiffen from the cold. You take them down, rubbing the fabric between your fingers. They feel fresher. Or maybe you've just convinced yourself they do. You slip them on, adjusting the waistband, and decide that's good enough for today. You can always give them a proper wash when the water warms up, or when you can borrow the washed-up slot from someone in exchange for a jar of pickled beets. You think about the laundry habits across the border, where ads in glossy magazines showed women tossing bright, silky lingerie into machines that spat them out warm and scented. Those machines were mythical creatures here, the stuff of whispered envy. If you knew someone who'd been to the West, you'd ask them if the stories were true. Did people really wash clothes whenever they felt like it? Could they really choose water temperature? It all sounds like something out of a bedtime story, as fanciful as a fairy tale, with indoor plumbing in the palace. The truth is, there's an odd sort of satisfaction in making things last. You've learned to stretch a clean period until the fabric practically begs for soap. You've become a master at hiding the state of your laundry from casual observers. And you've developed tricks like slipping an extra slip under your skirt to create a scent buffer, or carrying a little sachet of dried mint leaves in your pocket to crush discreetly when the day feels ripe. As you settle into your chair by the radiator, you notice a draft along the floor. You tuck your feet under you, pulling your sweater tighter, and think about how this week-long gamble isn't just about hygiene. It's about timing, resourcefulness, and a kind of stoic humor. The kind of humor where, if your friend confesses she's on day 5 with the same pair, you don't gasp, you just nod and say, "I once made it to 7." And she'll nod back, eyes wide with respect. In that way, these quiet compromises become small badges of endurance. You make mental notes for the next laundry day, patch the seam, maybe soak the fancy pair for a treat. See if the store still has the cheap imported powder detergent that smells faintly of citrus. You'll line the pieces up neatly along the radiator, the steam rising in curls, and feel that fleeting sense of triumph at having beaten back the inevitable, at least for a while. And until then, you keep playing the game. You keep wearing, airing, and pretending the word fresh means whatever you need it to mean. Because in this building, in this winter, during this long stretch of the Cold War, you're not just surviving, you're making it work with what you have. And sometimes, that's enough to make you smile to yourself as you close the drawer on your modest, hard-working little collection. You wake the next morning to the faint smell of something boiling in the kitchen down the hall. It's not coffee. That would be too luxurious. It's cabbage. Again, it's always cabbage in some form or another, and you've stopped asking why. The air in the building has a way of carrying scents like a lazy elevator, stopping at every floor to deposit them into each room. You sit up and realize the smell is in your hair, in your sweater, even faintly in the blanket wrapped around your legs. You've been wearing eau de cabbage without realizing it. And now it's as much a part of you as the sound of the radiator clanking. Perfume exists, technically. The shops sometimes have bottles, but they're the kind that smell as though someone tried to recreate a French fragrance using only what could be found in a chemical storeroom and a memory of flowers. The labels promise romance and mystery, but one whiff tells you it's closer to industrial lavender with a top note of something vaguely alcoholic. In moments of optimism, you've dabbed it behind your ears before a night out, only to find it fades within an hour, surrendering to the smell of boiled dinners and coal dust. Historians still argue whether the popularity of strong floral perfumes during this time was about covering unpleasant odors or about aspiring to an imagined sophistication. But you suspect it was a bit of both. You step into the hallway and feel the warmth from the communal kitchen radiating outward. Someone has already been in there for hours, cooking something that involves both cabbage and vinegar, a combination that seems designed to linger in the wallpaper forever. You pour yourself a cup of weak tea, and even it tastes faintly of the air. This is just how things are your senses adapt, learning to fold all these notes into a single, unremarkable background scent. Out in the streets, it's not much different. The air carries the breath of coal stoves, exhaust from rumbling buses, and the ever-present aroma of yesterday's soup reheated on 100 different stovetops. In winter, the cold traps the smells close to the ground, so you walk through a low-hanging cloud of collective cooking. Even if you wanted to, you couldn't hide from it. Your coat, scarf, and hat all join in, absorbing and then releasing the scent in small puffs each time you move. You pass a woman on the tram wearing what you think is perfume, but it's been fighting a losing battle with the day. Underneath the floral notes is the unmistakable tang of pickled vegetables and the faint whiff of damp wool. She catches you looking and smiles, as if to say, "Yes, I smell it too." It's a kind of camaraderie. No one is immune, so no one judges. Back at home, you remember the tricks people have told you to mask the constant scent. One is to keep a small jar of coffee grounds in your room, opening it to inhale when the cabbage gets too intense. Another is to tuck a sprig of dried herbs, mint, thyme, maybe rosemary, if you're lucky, into your coat pocket. You've tried both, and they work for about 3 minutes before the stronger smells seep back in. You think about how the smell isn't just in the air, it's in the fabrics, the curtains, the very paint on the walls. Even newly washed clothes can't quite escape it, especially if they've been dried indoors near the kitchen. The scent of clean laundry here is a mix of soap, damp cloth, and just a hint of whatever was cooking that day. There's no such thing as the crisp, unscented freshness people in glossy magazines talk about here. Fresh has undertones of stew. Some nights, lying in bed, you can track your neighbor's dinners by the smells drifting under your door. There's the rich, earthy aroma of borscht one night, the sharp tang of sauerkraut the next. Once in a while, you catch a whiff of something fried, pancakes or cutlets, and it feels like a special occasion, even if you're not the one eating it. You imagine the scent curling into your hair as you sleep, weaving itself into your dreams. There's an odd kind of pride in being able to identify these scents instantly. You can tell if the cabbage was boiled alone or with potatoes, if the soup has dill or not, if the bread in the oven is rye or wheat. It's a skill you didn't mean to acquire, like being able to recognize a person by their footsteps. And sometimes, in the quiet moments, you find it oddly comforting. Once, a friend visited from a smaller town and brought with her a bar of perfumed soap, real perfumed soap, the kind that left your hands smelling faintly of violets. You used it sparingly, afraid to waste it, and for a whole afternoon, you felt like you carried a little bubble of different air around you. But by the next day, the cabbage had returned, and the violets were just a faint memory, like the echo of a song. You've heard stories of women who would dab a little cologne on the inside of their skirts, hoping the motion of walking would release the scent in waves. It works, sort of, but it's hard to find the right balance. You don't want to smell like a spilled bottle. And even if you did, it would still have to fight through the day's realities. There's no winning entirely, only moments of temporary reprieve. Sometimes you wonder what someone from far away would think if they stepped into your building. Would they wrinkle their nose? Would they try to name the smells to separate them? Or would they simply stand there, overwhelmed, unsure if they should call it unpleasant or just unfamiliar? For you, it's not really either, it's simply home. And like any home, its scent is part of its identity, stubborn and enduring. The day winds down, and the evening meal begins. You can hear the clatter of pots and the hum of conversations in the kitchen. The smell of cabbage intensifies, joined now by something meaty, probably leftover broth from yesterday, stretched into today's soup. You know that when you step out later, the smell will cling to you like a companion, following you into the tram, into the shop, into the quiet of your own room. And you'll barely notice, because it's been there all along. You pour yourself another cup of tea, leaning against the cool wall, and take a slow sip, Outside, snow begins to fall, carrying its own clean, crisp scent that almost, but not quite, slips into the building when someone opens the front door. For a moment, you breathe in, imagining what it would be like if that freshness stayed, if it became the building's new scent. But you know it wouldn't last. By morning, the cabbage will be back, stubborn as ever, reminding you that in this place, in this time, perfume is a fleeting luxury, but boiled dinners are forever. The kitchen is quiet this afternoon, save for the occasional metallic clink of a spoon against enamel. You've claimed a small corner of the counter for yourself, laying out your tools. A chipped hand mirror that wobbles when you set it down. A teaspoon you've commandeered from the communal drawer. And the contents of your cosmetics kit, if you can even call it that. There's a little tin of cocoa powder, a beet you boiled last night and left wrapped in paper, and a stub of an eyebrow pencil that's more wood than pigment now. You're about to engage in the Cold War's particular brand of kitchen counter glamour. In another life, you'd have a dressing table covered in glass bottles and powders in pastel tins, maybe a lamp with a soft shade. But here, during this era, your makeup often comes from the same shelves you used to make dinner. You slice a thin wedge from the beet and dab it against your cheeks, the juice leaving a flush so convincing it almost feels decadent. There's a sweetness to it, a faint, earthy scent that makes you think of gardens and summer, even if the winter wind is rattling the kitchen window right now. You've read somewhere that in rural areas, women swore by beet juice as a natural tint for lips as well. Though you have to be careful unless you want to look like you've just finished eating cherries in a hurry. The cocoa powder is for your eyes. You dip a fingertip in and tap it onto your lids, the fine dust leaving a soft brown shadow. It's subtle, but it gives you the feeling of having tried, of having prepared yourself for whatever the day might bring. Historians still argue whether these improvised cosmetics were born purely from necessity, or whether they carried a kind of defiant creativity. But standing here now, brushing cocoa over your eyelids, you feel it's a bit of both. You remember your aunt telling you how she once mixed ash from the stove with petroleum jelly to make eyeliner. It sounded absurd at first, but when she showed you a photograph of herself from that time, eyes lined dark and sharp, you had to admit it worked. The photo was in black and white, but you could almost see the confidence it gave her. That's part of what this whole ritual is about. Not just looking different, but feeling different, even if the ingredients came from last night's dinner or the stove's scrapings. You take the stub of eyebrow pencil and try to coax a bit more pigment from it. It's hard to keep a steady hand when the mirror tilts at the slightest nudge, but you manage. Your eyebrows now look a little more even, a little more deliberate. It's funny you're not going to a party or meeting anyone important today. You might not even leave the building. But this act, this tiny effort to shape yourself into something beyond, person in heavy coat smelling faintly of cabbage, feels important. Across the hall, you hear footsteps and the sound of a kettle whistling. You imagine someone else in another kitchen doing the same as you, slicing a beet smudging cocoa, maybe dabbing a bit of flour onto their nose to take away shine. These tricks travel by word of mouth, passed between friends in workplaces, whispered in queues, traded like secret recipes. Everyone knows them, but everyone also acts like their private knowledge. Your grandmother once told you about using candle soot mixed with spit as mascara. She swore it gave her lashes more volume than anything you could buy in the store, though she admitted it stung if you got it too close to your eyes. She'd apply it in the dim light of an oil lamp before dances, checking the result in a piece of broken mirror propped against the wall. Sometimes, she said, she'd run her fingers through her hair afterward, transferring just enough soot to give it a darker, richer look. The idea of using soot in your hair seems almost reckless, but in her photos, her hair does look impossibly full. There's a quiet pleasure in this transformation, however small. You think about how, in some Western magazines smuggled into the country, makeup is advertised as a way to highlight your true self or express your individuality. Here, it's a way to improvise, to make something out of nothing, to feel a little polished in a world that doesn't often give you the chance. You may not have a lipstick that lasts all day, but you have beats, and beats will do. The downside, of course, is the impermanence. Beet juice fades quickly, cocoa rubs off with the lightest touch, and any attempt at mascara is at the mercy of weather. Step outside into the wind, and suddenly your carefully tinted cheeks are competing with the redness of cold. Come back in, and the steam from the kitchen starts to soften everything, like a painter smudging lines on a canvas. But maybe that's part of the charm. It's fleeting, and that makes you appreciate it more. There's also the unpredictability. You've learned through trial and error that the wrong beat will stain too strongly, leaving you looking sunburned for hours. Too much cocoa can make your eyelids itch, and once you tried adding a drop of vanilla extract to your lip tint, thinking it would be a nice scent. Instead, it made you crave cake all afternoon, which was more torturous than glamorous. You sit back for a moment, studying your reflection in the slightly warped mirror. It's not perfect, your eyeliner isn't even. Your cheeks are a little mismatched, but it's good enough. And good enough has become a kind of personal motto, one that feels realistic in a place where resources are limited, and the weather does its best to undo all your efforts. The teaspoon you used for cocoa is rinsed and returned to the drawer, where it will soon find itself stirring soup or scooping sugar. The beet slice is wrapped up again for tomorrow, though it will be a little drier, a little less vibrant. You wipe your hands on a towel that smells faintly of last week's laundry soap and step away from the counter. As you leave the kitchen, you pass by a neighbor who gives you a quick glance, her eyes lingering just a second longer than usual. You wonder if she notices the cocoa, the beat, the effort. She doesn't say anything, but there's a small nod, almost approving. You tuck that away like a secret compliment, something to keep you warm later. Back in your room, you slip into your coat and scarf, the familiar scents and textures settling around you. The makeup feels like a small layer of armor beneath it all, invisible to most, but obvious to you. You might spend the afternoon running small errands, or you might just stay in, reading by the window. But either way, you'll do it with a little extra lift in your chin. And later, when you wash your face in cold water and see the beet juice swirling pink into the basin, you'll smile at the day's quiet indulgence. It may have started in the kitchen with a beet and a tin of cocoa, but it ended with you feeling, if only for a few hours, a little brighter against the gray of the world outside. You lean over the small enamel sink, splashing your face with water that feels like it's just melted from an iceberg, and stare at your reflection in the streaked mirror. Your teeth are there, in more or less the right order, but the shine they once had is long gone. It's not neglect, it's circumstance. Toothpaste is hard to come by, and when you do find it, it's usually in a small aluminum tube with a crimped end, its contents smelling faintly of chalk and medicinal herbs. Today, the tube is empty, flattened like a pressed flower, which means you're turning to the old method, bread and baking soda. The bread method sounds strange if you've never tried it, but here it's normal. You tear off a piece of yesterday's loaf, the kind that's already gone a little stiff, and rub it along your teeth. The texture scrapes away at whatever's clinging there, leaving behind a faint taste of sour rye. It's not glamorous, but it does something, if only giving you the illusion of cleanliness. Baking soda, when you have it, is more effective, though the taste makes you wince every time. You wet your toothbrush, if you have one, or just your finger, dip it into the powder, and rub it along your gums and teeth. It's gritty, salty, and somehow both too much and not enough at once. Historians still argue whether these methods did any real good for dental health, or were just the best available compromise. But you know they made people feel like they were at least trying. Dentists are a rare luxury. You might get an appointment if you know someone, or if the pain gets bad enough to warrant it. And when you do, the experience is more like a small military operation, efficient, fast, and without unnecessary comforts like numbing agents. You remember once hearing a neighbor describe her visit as being interrogated by my molars. It's the kind of humor people use to soften the edges of reality. Your grandmother swore by rinsing with salted water, a trick she picked up long before toothpaste was common. She'd boil the water first, let it cool to just warm, and then swirl it around her mouth with the grim determination of someone who knew this was as close to minty freshness as she'd get. You've tried it, and it works in a way, but only if you enjoy feeling like your mouth has been briefly turned into the Black Sea. There's also charcoal, though it's messy. You've seen women crush it into fine powder, dip a damp cloth in it, and rub it over their teeth until they gleamed faintly gray. The effect, oddly enough, is a temporary whiteness once you rinse, but the process leaves black streaks on your fingers and sink that are almost impossible to scrub out. You tried it once and ended up looking like you'd been chewing pencils for fun. Sometimes, in moments of rare abundance, someone will bring back a Western toothpaste from a trip abroad. The smell alone, sweet, minty, impossibly fresh, feels like a glimpse into another life. You once tried a pea-sized dab from a borrowed tube, brushing until your gums tingled, and for the rest of the day, you couldn't stop breathing through your mouth just to savor the coolness. But that kind of thing doesn't last, and soon enough, you're back to your bread and baking soda, adjusting your expectations. This morning, you decide on baking soda. You wet your index finger, scoop a small amount, and begin rubbing in gentle circles. The gritty texture catches between your teeth, and you try not to think about how much enamel you might be wearing away. You rinse with cold water, spitting into the sink, and watch the cloudy swirl disappear down the drain. There's a faint freshness, clean in the same way washing clothes in rainwater is clean, imperfect but satisfying. A neighbor's child passes by the open door, holding a cup of water to her mouth, swishing dramatically before spitting into the hallway bucket. She grins at you, 2 front teeth missing, and says, "Mama says it makes the new teeth grow faster." You smile back, remembering when you believed the same thing, before you learned that teeth grow on their own schedule, regardless of salt water or bread crusts. In the evening, you sometimes chew parsley when you can get it, not just for the taste, but for the way it leaves your breath feeling fresher. Of course, parsley is hardly a staple here, it's a garnish. And even then, only when the market has it. More often, you chew a clove or a piece of mint leaf, which works, but can leave you smelling more like soup than toothpaste. There's a certain practicality about all of this. You don't think much about whitening, straightening, or polishing, not because you don't care, but because it's not part of the reality here. Teeth are for chewing, speaking, and if you're lucky, smiling without too much pain. Anything beyond that is considered a luxury, not a necessity. You remember overhearing 2 women in the tram, once debating whether tooth decay was worse during wartime or peacetime. One argued wartime because sugar was scarce, so people's teeth lasted longer without it. The other countered that peacetime was worse because the increase in bread and tea, often with sweeteners, led to more cavities. They never reached a conclusion, but you sat there quietly, pressing your tongue to your own teeth, wondering which era your mouth belonged to. After rinsing once more, you pat your mouth dry with a towel and glance at the mirror again. Your teeth look about the same as before, but you feel a little more awake, a little more ready to face the day. It's not the crisp, foamy clean you've read about in magazines, but it's your kind of clean. And in a place where hot water, soap, and toothpaste all have to be rationed like coins, that's good enough. The smell of bread drifts in from the kitchen, mingling with the ever-present cabbage. You wonder, briefly, if tomorrow you might try the bread method again, if only because it feels a little indulgent, like you're repurposing something meant for the table into something meant for yourself. In a world where most things are shared, borrowed, or passed along, even the smallest acts of self-care feel like victories. You set the small jar of baking soda back on the shelf, push the mirror to the side, and leave the sink behind. Your mouth feels fresher than it has in days, and for now, that's enough to make you smile to yourself as you step back into the hallway. The air in the laundry room is heavy with steam, but not the kind that comes from luxury. It's the damp, almost metallic steam of clothes being boiled in a dented aluminum tub. The water faintly gray from whatever soap or soap substitute you've managed to scrounge. You stand there with your sleeves rolled up, stirring the pot of garments with a long wooden stick, not unlike a witch at her cauldron, except the brew here smells faintly of cabbage water and cheap detergent. Your hands are raw from the lye soap you used yesterday, a block that crumbles if you press too hard. It's harsh, but it cuts through grease better than anything else you can get. People swear by adding baking soda or even vinegar to the rinse, though the vinegar makes everything smell like pickles for hours. You've tried both, and honestly, the result is more about feeling industrious than seeing any real difference. Historians still argue whether the obsession with boiling everything in post-war households was a genuine hygiene necessity or just a leftover cultural reflex from earlier germ-fearing generations. Underwear gets special treatment, at least in theory. You boil it separately, if only to convince yourself you're keeping things sanitary. The truth is, in a place where water has to be carried in buckets and heated on a stove, there's no such thing as freshly laundered in the Western sense. You dry things on lines strung up across the kitchen, where they take on the smell of whatever you're cooking. A stew-heavy week means you smell faintly of onions before you've even left the house. Stockings are a different battle entirely. Nylon is scarce, and when you get a pair, you treat it like an heirloom. You wash them by hand, gently, in lukewarm water, using a splash of diluted shampoo because it's softer than soap. You hang them away from the stove so the heat won't warp them. Still, runs appear, and when they do, you mend them with a needle and thread so fine it almost disappears between your fingers. You once heard about women in the West throwing stockings away after one tear, and the thought struck you as almost scandalous. Here, a run just means the beginning of a new seam. When the weather turns cold, washing becomes even more of a chore. Water freezes in the buckets, and heating enough to do a full load can take hours. You find yourself wearing the same sweater for days, maybe even weeks, letting it air out on the windowsill at night in the hope that the frost will kill whatever lingers. You shake it in the morning, put it back on, and tell yourself that the brisk scent is fresh, even if it's just the smell of cold air and wood smoke. There are whispers about laundry shortcuts. Some people sprinkle talcum powder into underclothes and simply shake them out instead of washing. Others use a cloth soaked in alcohol to rub down the inside of collars and cuffs, killing odors without touching a drop of water. You've tried the alcohol trick, and while it works in a pinch, it leaves behind a smell that makes you feel like you've been sitting too close to the Samogan still. The community laundry days are a mix of work and gossip. Women gather in the public wash house, sleeves up, skirts tucked at the waist, chatting as they scrub. The washboards sing their gritty rhythm, punctuated by bursts of laughter or the sharp clack of a bucket being set down. It's a place where you hear everything: who's getting married, who's been seen with someone they shouldn't, which shop might have real soap next week. You take mental notes, but mostly you focus on your scrubbing, knowing that the faster you work, the sooner you'll be done with the ache in your shoulders. You can't help but compare the softness of freshly washed clothes to the stiffness of ones that have been worn too long. Sheets, especially, tell the story. When they've gone too long without a wash, they develop a certain weight, a clinginess that no amount of shaking can fix. Clean sheets, though rare, are a small slice of heaven. You climb into bed, the fabric cool and slightly rough against your skin, and for a moment, you almost believe you're somewhere else. The soap rationing makes you inventive. Potato water, the starchy liquid left from boiling potatoes, is rumored to work as a gentle wash for delicate fabrics. You try it once on a scarf, and though it doesn't exactly clean, it leaves the fabric soft and smelling faintly of earth. Some swear by washing wool with grated bar soap mixed into warm water, while others use just plain water and lots of patience, reshaping the garment as it dries. One winter, the pipes froze for nearly 2 weeks, and you had to haul snow inside to melt for washing. The irony of spending hours turning snow into water, only to heat it back up, wasn't lost on you. You'd stand there with dripping laundry hanging around the stove, the entire room smelling like wet wool and iron. And then there's the matter of smell, personal smell. Perfume is expensive and hard to find, so clothing carries whatever scent you've lived in that week. Sometimes it's smoke from the stove, sometimes onions, sometimes the faint mustiness of damp fabric. A neighbor once told you she wore a sprig of dried lavender pinned inside her blouse, not for anyone else, but so she could smell something sweet during the day. You tried it once, but lavender is even rarer than nylon stockings here. Every so often, someone manages to get their hands on laundry soap from abroad, brightly packaged, with a scent so floral it almost makes you dizzy. You remember washing a dress with it once, and for days afterward, strangers would comment that you smelled like a magazine. It was both a compliment and a reminder that such luxuries don't last. As you wring out the last piece of clothing, you look at your hands, red and wrinkled from the hot water. The skin is rough, but you rub them against your skirt and think about how, in a few hours, the clothes will be dry, folded, and ready to wear again. Not perfectly clean, not like the posters show, but clean enough to make you feel presentable in a world where soap is as much currency as it is necessity. The hairbrush sits on the small table by the mirror, its wooden handle worn smooth from years of use. You pick it up, feeling the familiar weight in your hand, and run your fingers through the bristles to dislodge the strands of hair that always seem to gather no matter how often you clean it. Hair, during these years, is both a badge of dignity and a constant battle. You've heard people in the city talk about weekly shampoos like it's nothing. But here, water is precious, and shampoo is a luxury item that arrives in inconsistent bursts, if it arrives at all. More often than not, You wash your hair once every 2 or 3 weeks, stretching the time in between with tricks learned from mothers and grandmothers who made do with even less. The most common trick is brushing long, slow strokes from scalp to ends, supposedly to spread the natural oils. You sit in the lamplight, pulling the brush through your hair until your arm aches, telling yourself that each pass is polishing, that it's making your hair shine rather than simply redistributing whatever's already there. Historians still argue whether this practice actually kept hair healthier or was just a cultural comfort, like stirring tea even after the sugar has dissolved. Either way, the brushing is almost meditative, a small act of control in a time when so much feels dictated by shortages and schedules you didn't choose. When shampoo does run out, there are alternatives: coarse rye flour dusted into the roots and brushed out to absorb grease, or rinsing hair with a mix of vinegar and water to cut the oil. The vinegar rinse leaves a sharp scent that clings for a day or two, though some women insist it gives the hair a certain shine. You've tried the flour method, carefully shaking it over your scalp like powdered sugar on a cake, then brushing until the white dust disappears. It works well enough, though you sometimes wonder if the faint smell of bread dough follows you into public. Soap, the same harsh lye blocks you use for laundry, can double as shampoo in desperate times. It strips your hair so thoroughly that you can almost hear it squeak between your fingers as you rinse, but it leaves it dry and brittle. That's when you remember the old remedy of rubbing in a few drops of sunflower oil to restore some softness, though it has the side effect of making you smell faintly like a kitchen. In winter, the cold turns hair washing into an ordeal. You heat a pot of water on the stove, carry it carefully to the wash basin, and kneel, splashing your scalp with handfuls of warmth that cool too quickly. By the time you've lathered and rinsed, the ends of your hair feel stiff with ice. You wrap a towel around your head and sit close to the stove, the damp fabric steaming in the heat. There's a certain satisfaction in it, the way the warmth seeps into your scalp, but it's a slow process, and you know you'll be smelling faintly of wood smoke until your next wash. There are stories, half believed, of women during the Cold War who used beer as a hair rinse, claiming it gave volume and softness. You tried it once, using a glass of stale beer someone had left at the back of the pantry. It did make your hair a little softer, but the smell clung stubbornly, and you spent the day wondering if everyone thought you'd been drinking since breakfast. Another whispered method involved steeping nettles in hot water and using the green-tinted liquid as a rinse, said to strengthen hair and encourage growth. You've never been sure if it worked, but it left your hair smelling faintly herbal, which was a welcome change from vinegar and soap. Cutting hair is another matter entirely. Professional salons exist, but they're expensive, and you can't always justify the cost. More often, you sit in the kitchen with a friend or neighbor, a pair of dull scissors in hand, and take turns trimming each other's ends. The hair falls in uneven clumps on the floor, and you sweep it into the stove without a second thought. Styles are simple, practical, and built to last until the next cut, which could be months away. Coloring your hair is rare, and when it happens, it's often done with makeshift methods, strong black tea to darken, or a rinse of beetroot juice to add a reddish tint. The results are inconsistent at best, but they offer the illusion of change. And in times like these, illusion can feel just as satisfying as reality. You once met a woman who swore she used onion skins boiled into a strong broth to bring out golden tones in her hair. You weren't sure if it was worth the risk of smelling like soup. Public bathhouses play their part in hair care, especially when home washing is impossible. You stand in line, towel in hand, waiting your turn at the shared basin, where the water is often lukewarm and slightly cloudy from the women before you. Still, the chance to rinse your hair fully, to feel it clean and light for even a day, is worth the wait. You see women there with intricate braids, carefully preserved between washes, their hair pinned so tightly it barely moves. It's a clever strategy. Braids hide oil and keep hair neat long after it's lost that freshly washed bounce. Of course, not everyone follows the same rules. You've heard of women who simply stop washing their hair altogether in winter, relying on headscarves to keep it covered and contained. They say that after a month or two, the hair self-cleanses, though you've never had the courage to test that theory. Scarves themselves are a kind of protection, not just from dirt and cold, but from prying eyes, a way to present yourself as tidy, even when the truth lies hidden beneath. One summer, a visiting cousin from the West brought a small bottle of imported shampoo, the kind that lathers instantly and smells like a meadow in spring. You remember washing your hair with it and being stunned by how easily the foam rinsed away, how soft your hair felt afterward. You rationed that bottle like gold, using a drop at a time, until one day it was gone, and you were back to flour, vinegar, and the old wooden brush. On days when washing isn't possible, you take comfort in arranging your hair differently, sweeping it up into a bun, braiding it, or twisting it into a knot under a scarf. These little changes help you forget that it's been far too long since your last proper wash. Sometimes you catch a whiff of your own hair and think, well, it could be worse. And you remind yourself that survival, not luxury, is the rule here. Even in these conditions, there's a kind of intimacy to hair care. You think of mothers braiding their daughters' hair in the morning light, of friends sitting knee to knee, brushing each other's strands with slow, deliberate strokes. These moments are quiet, almost sacred acts of care in a world that's always demanding something from you. And as you set the brush back down on the table, you can't help but think that maybe the shine in your hair isn't just from the oils or the rinses, but from the hands that have tended it all along. You wake up to the faint smell of damp fabric, that unmistakable scent of clothes that have been washed but never quite dried. The little pile of laundry in the corner reminds you that today is one of those days. You can't put it off any longer. During the Cold War, doing laundry isn't a matter of tossing clothes into a machine and walking away. It's a full-scale operation that starts with deciding which garments are worth the effort. You mentally sort them, undergarments first, since those can't be stretched more than a few days without making life distinctly unpleasant. Then the blouses and skirts, which, if you're lucky, can be aired out and reworn before they truly demand washing. You fill the large enamel basin with water you've heated on the stove. The steam curls upward, carrying with it the sharp tang of lye soap, the same harsh, crumbly block that does double duty for scrubbing floors and removing stains from laundry. You chip off a small piece, crumble it into the water, and swirl it around until the suds rise reluctantly. Soap is rationed in your mind, even if the state isn't currently rationing it officially. You never know when you'll be able to get more. Historians still argue whether women in rural areas truly had less access to laundry supplies than their urban counterparts. But you've always suspected that living outside the city meant making do with far less. Laundry is a cold weather nightmare. In winter, your fingers ache from plunging into water that loses its heat far too quickly. You rub the cloth against the washboard, hearing the rhythmic scrape of fabric against ridged metal, and you think about how every Cold War film seems to leave out this part: the aching shoulders, the endless bending over the basin, the occasional knuckle skinned raw from an overzealous scrub. The washboard itself is worn smooth in places, a family relic passed down from your grandmother, whose hands once worked these same grooves. When water is scarce, there's the option of spot cleaning, which is really just code for pretending the whole garment is clean because you've scrubbed out the most visible stains. A little vinegar, a bit of baking soda if you can find it, and some vigorous rubbing will take out a patch of soup or tea. The rest of the fabric, well, you hope no one sniffs too closely. You remember once dabbing perfume along the seams of a blouse, just to mask the faint mustiness, only to be told you smelled like someone's fancy aunt who'd fallen asleep in the linen closet. Drying clothes is its own ordeal. In summer, you hang them outside on a line strung between two poles, the cotton sheets billowing like sails in the breeze. But in winter, the damp cold refuses to cooperate. You string lines across the kitchen, clothes dripping onto the floor, turning the air into a humid fog. If you're lucky enough to have a working radiator, you drape socks and underthings over it, though sometimes the heat scorches them, leaving odd marks that never wash out. In some households, clothes are laid flat on towels near the stove, constantly rotated in the hope that they'll dry before mildew sets in. The smell of damp wool is particularly stubborn. You've had sweaters that seem to hold on to that wet sheep scent for days, no matter how carefully you dried them. Some women swore by adding a splash of vinegar to the rinse water to counteract it. Others preferred to hang wool items outside for a few hours in the freezing air, claiming that the frost freshened the fibers. You've tried both, and while the vinegar trick works, it does leave you smelling like pickles for a while. Laundry day is often social, though not always in a pleasant way. At the communal washing area, especially in apartment blocks, you stand side by side with other women, each guarding her own small space. There's the gossip, of course, traded over the slap of wet fabric and the squeal of wrung-out cloth. But there's also the quiet judgment. Everyone notices how often you appear here, what kind of soap you use, and whether your undergarments are mended or threadbare. One time, you caught another woman staring at a patched slip you hung on the line, and you still aren't sure if her expression was pity or admiration. Undergarments present their own set of challenges. Elastic wears out quickly, especially when washed in hot water or scrubbed too hard, and replacements aren't always easy to find. You've had the experience of a waistband snapping without warning, sending you into an awkward shuffle for the rest of the day. To prolong their life, you wash them gently by hand, even if it means the water stays gray after the first rinse. Some women make their own from scraps of fabric, stitching by candlelight while their children sleep. The seam's a little uneven, but the fit serviceable enough. In times of severe shortage, clothing itself becomes a matter of creative reuse. You've turned worn-out blouses into aprons, cut down men's shirts into something vaguely feminine, and even cannibalized old dresses for fabric to patch newer ones. The smell of old clothes being boiled in a pot, an attempt to disinfect them, has a way of lingering in your nostrils for hours afterward. And yes, you've had moments where you've ironed a dress just to make it look fresh, even though it hasn't touched water in weeks. There are quirky methods that don't always make sense, but persist anyway. One neighbor insists that adding potato peel water to the wash makes linen softer. Another swears by the snow wash, where in deep winter you lay clothes on fresh snow, then beat them with a broom before bringing them inside. The snow supposedly draws out dirt and odors, though you suspect it's more of a tradition than an effective cleaning method. You tried it once, and your skirt came back wetter than when you started, with the added bonus of smelling faintly like frozen mud. On rare occasions, you gain access to a proper washing machine, usually some cranky, semi-functional relic in a friend's apartment. It's noisy, shakes like it's about to take off, and still requires you to wring the clothes out by hand afterward. But the sheer luxury of not having to scrub each item yourself makes you almost giddy. You've even been known to bring along extra laundry to make the most of the opportunity. Walking home with your arms full of dripping clothes because you couldn't resist washing just one more blouse. The drying process is sometimes sped up by pressing damp clothes with a hot iron, the hiss of steam filling the room. You know it's not recommended. It can damage the fabric. But there's something satisfying about feeling the cloth go from clammy to crisp in a single pass. The danger, of course, is scorching. And you've learned the hard way that once that happens, there's no going back. Even with all the labor involved, there's a strange rhythm to laundry. The scrubbing, the rinsing, the wringing, it's repetitive, yes, but also strangely grounding. You find yourself humming as you work, falling into the same patterns your grandmother might have followed decades ago. The clothes you wash carry traces of your life, the faint perfume from last week's gathering, The stubborn soup stain from a hurried lunch, the soot from the stove that somehow always finds its way onto your cuffs. By the time you hang the last item to dry, your back aches and your hands are wrinkled from the water. But there's a quiet satisfaction in seeing the clothes lined up, dripping in unison. Each one a small victory against the grime and the shortages. You know they'll never be as soft or as fragrant as the laundry in glossy Western magazines, but they're clean enough, fresh enough, and in times like these, that's all that really matters. Evening comes early in winter, the daylight fading before you've had a chance to finish all the small tasks that pile up. You're sitting near the kitchen table with a chipped enamel mug, watching the tea leaves swirl lazily in the bottom, and you're trying not to think about the draft creeping in from the window. The glass has a permanent film on it, the kind that never really goes away no matter how hard you scrub. You've used vinegar, newspaper, and even an old wool sock in the hope that the streaks might vanish. But the view beyond is always a little fogged, like looking into another world through tired eyes. It's bath night, which means rearranging the apartment to make space for the tub. Not a real bathtub. Those are a luxury most of your friends only see in films. But the portable galvanized one you keep tucked away behind the wardrobe. You wrestle it into the center of the room, careful not to scrape the floorboards too loudly. The neighbors are quick to knock on the walls if they think you're rearranging furniture at an unreasonable hour. Filling it is a logistical dance. You heat water on the stove in your largest pot, pouring it carefully into the tub, steam clouding the air until the walls sweat. Then another pot, and another, until you've built up enough warmth to make it bearable. The rest will be topped with cold water from the tap, which always runs with a faint metallic taste in the smell. Privacy is scarce. The door doesn't quite latch, so you drape a blanket over it from the inside, a flimsy barrier against whoever might wander past. You've learned to bathe quickly, soap up, rinse, and get out, because the water cools fast, and because there's always someone waiting their turn. When you were a child, bath time was a family affair, and you still remember the awkwardness of sitting in water clouded by someone else's soap, pretending not to notice the little bits floating around. As an adult, you try to time your turn so you're first, though sometimes that means being the one to carry all the heavy pots of water. The soap is the same block you used earlier for laundry, though you shave off a corner to make it easier on your skin. It's harsh, leaving your hands dry and your elbows chalky, but it's better than nothing. You remember reading in a smuggled magazine about imported scented bath products, pastel-colored and creamy, and the thought seemed almost unreal, like something from a fairy tale. Here, you finish the bath smelling faintly of lye, with hair that will take hours to dry in the cold apartment. Hair washing is another calculated decision. In summer, you might risk it every week, letting the sun do the drying. In winter, you try to stretch it as long as possible, brushing in the mornings to redistribute the oils, and plaiting it to hide the limpness. Some women swear by rinsing with beer or vinegar to add shine. You've tried both, though the beer leaves you smelling like a brewery, and the vinegar reminds you of laundry day. When there's no proper shampoo, you crumble laundry soap into warm water and hope for the best. It strips the dirt, yes, but it leaves your scalp feeling tight, almost squeaky. After the bath, you wrap yourself in the thickest towel you own, though thick is a generous description. It's been washed so many times that it's more suggestion than fabric, thin and scratchy in places where the threads have worn down. You rub briskly, trying to keep warm, then pull on your oldest but softest nightdress, mended at the hem and fraying at the cuffs. The mending isn't pretty, but the stitches hold, and you've stopped caring about appearances in these private moments. The floor near the stove is the warmest spot in the apartment, and that's where you set up your hair drying station. A low stool, a towel over your shoulders, and a patient half-hour of combing, turning your head toward the stove whenever the warmth flares. You've singed a few strands in the past, leaning too close, but the speed is worth the risk. Some women roll their hair in rags to create curls overnight. You've done it for special occasions, but most nights you can't be bothered. Straight hair dries faster, and that's the priority. While you sit there, you think about how hygiene routines become something more than just cleanliness in times like these. They're an act of control in a world where so much is decided elsewhere, by people you'll never meet. You can't change the shortages, the damp in the walls, or the fact that your towel will never feel like the ones in the shop windows. But you can choose to comb your hair slowly, to rinse your face one extra time, to rub cream into your hands, even if it's just a smear of petroleum jelly from a little tin. Speaking of hands, yours are rough tonight. The cold water from rinsing laundry earlier has left the skin tight, and the knuckles look almost bruised. You work in the ointment with small circles, remembering when your mother would do the same for you as a child, blowing on the cream to warm it before pressing it into your fingers. She always said you could tell the story of a woman's life from her hands, and you wonder what yours say. Probably that you've carried too many buckets and peeled too many potatoes. By now, the bathwater has cooled to a cloudy gray, and it needs to be emptied before morning. You drag the tub toward the kitchen door and tip it carefully into a large pail, carrying it in trips to the drain outside. The water steams in the frigid air, vanishing into the dark, and for a moment, you watch your breath mingle with it. The neighbors' windows glow dimly, and somewhere a radio plays a muffled tune, the kind that gets stuck in your head for days. Back inside, you fold the blanket from the door and tuck the tub away again. The room smells faintly of soap and steam, a temporary freshness that will fade overnight, replaced by the usual mix of cooking smells, coal dust, and whatever drifts in from the hallway. You know it's not perfect, but it's enough. You've done what you can to feel clean, to shake off the grime of the day. And tomorrow, you'll face the world with hair that smells faintly of soap, and the quiet confidence that comes from knowing you fought, in your own small way, against the drabness. You blow out the small candle on the table, climb into bed under layers of blankets that are heavy, but never quite warm enough, and listen to the creaks of the building settling for the night. Somewhere below, a door slams. Above, footsteps cross the ceiling. You curl your toes, pull the covers tighter, and drift toward sleep, already planning the next small victory. Maybe mending that skirt with the frayed hem. Maybe finding time to polish your shoes. In a world that often feels gray and unyielding, even the smallest acts of care are their own kind of quiet rebellion. Morning begins not with the sound of an alarm, but with the clatter of pipes and the distant thud of someone slamming the main building door against the wind. The air is cold, so cold it bites your nose before you've even sat up. You pull the blanket tighter around your shoulders for a moment, staring at the faint light coming through the window. Frost has formed lace-like patterns across the glass, beautiful in a way you almost resent, because beauty shouldn't come with such a chill. You rub a clear spot with your palm and look down into the courtyard. A neighbor in a heavy coat is shaking a rug over the railing. Clouds of dust rising like breath in the air. Your own morning hygiene begins not in the bathroom, but in the kitchen. The bathroom is shared, and you have no interest in queuing in the hallway with a toothbrush in your hand, shifting from foot to foot while someone else lingers inside. Instead, you fill a kettle and set it on the stove. Then fetch the enamel basin from its place beneath the counter. When the water is warm enough, you pour it in, mixing with a little cold to make it tolerable, and set it on the table. There's a chipped mirror propped against the wall, and this becomes your wash station. You splash your face, feeling the shock of it chase the last fogginess from your mind. The soap here is just as harsh as the one you use for bathing, but you've learned to lather only lightly, rinsing quickly before your skin can tighten too much. You dry with a small towel that's been boiled so many times it's lost all softness, then smooth a dab of cream, thick, unscented, more like grease, across your cheeks. Without it, the wind would crack your skin by midday. Teeth come next, though toothpaste is a rare treat. Today you have some, squeezed from a tube that's been rolled so tightly it's more metal than paste inside. On days without, you use baking soda mixed with a little salt, the grit scouring away the night. You spit into the basin, rinse with cold water, and feel the metallic tang linger on your tongue. There's no mouthwash, but a quick chew of parsley from the jar by the window does its best to freshen things. Hair care in the morning is less about washing than about managing. You unbraid the plate you slept in, running a wide-toothed comb through the strands to undo the waves. The comb is missing a few teeth, so you have to be careful not to snag. Some women you know keep their hair short to make this easier, but you've always preferred it long, even if it means more work. A little water smoothed over the top tames the worst of the flyaways, and you twist it into a bun at the back of your head, securing it with the same 2 pins you've used for years. They're slightly bent, but they do the job. Clean clothes are a relative concept. You choose the blouse that's been worn only twice since its last washing, sniffing the fabric near the collar. It's fine, especially once you layer the wool cardigan over it. The skirt is heavier, a winter staple that falls mid-calf, and the tights underneath have been mended so many times you can see the patches even without looking too closely. Shoes are last, a pair of scuffed leather boots with the laces replaced by string. You wipe them quickly with a damp rag to knock off yesterday's grime. Then pull on gloves, grateful for their thin barrier against the cold. The shared bathroom door opens in the hallway, releasing a puff of steam that smells faintly of soap and mildew. A woman steps out, hair wrapped in a towel, and you nod to each other in that brief acknowledgement of shared survival. You've both done the morning work, the rituals that keep you presentable in a world where being clean isn't easy. Breakfast is quick black bread, a slice of cheese if you're lucky, and tea brewed strong enough to stain the cup. You sip it slowly, feeling the heat spread down your throat, and think about how much of life now revolves around maintenance. Of the body, of clothes, of the space you live in. Every day is a series of small repairs and cleanings, each one a thread in the larger fabric of making do. Laundry is looming on your mind. It's not today's chore, but it's coming soon, and you're already calculating whether you have enough soap and enough space on the drying rack. In winter, laundry becomes a battle with dampness. The air inside is cold, so clothes take days to dry, and in that time, they pick up the smell of the apartment, cooking, coal dust, the faint trace of the neighbors' cigarettes. Some people hang their clothes outside to freeze dry, but you've never liked the way they stiffen, like boards, before you bring them back in. Your own small rebellion against the drabness of winter is the scarf you tie around your neck before leaving. It's bright red, the color having faded only a little despite years of wear, and it stands out against the muted tones of coats and streets. You like the way it feels, a reminder that you can still choose something beautiful. On the tram, you see other women doing the same: scarves, brooches, a touch of lipstick from a stub shared with a sister or friend. Little splashes of defiance in a gray world. The day is long, and when you finally return in the evening, you can feel the grit of the city on your skin. Washing up before bed is non-negotiable, no matter how tired you are. You heat another kettle, pour it into the basin, and strip to the waist, scrubbing arms and face, neck and hands. In the absence of a full bath, this ritual keeps you feeling human. You change into your nightdress, shaking out the skirt you wore all day before hanging it where the air can reach it. You sit for a while by the stove, rubbing your hands with the last of the cream, and think about how much of your time is taken by the act of staying clean. In another life, perhaps it would be a thoughtless part of the day, but here it's a constant negotiation with the weather, the supplies, and the shared spaces. And yet, you wouldn't trade it away. Each time you rinse your face, smooth your hair, or scrub your nails, you're reminding yourself that you are more than just someone enduring the shortages. You are someone who chooses to maintain, to preserve a version of yourself, untouched by the gray. When the light begins to dim again, you know it's time to prepare for bed. You check the kettle one last time, empty the basin into the drain, and fold the towel neatly over the chair to dry. Outside, the wind has picked up, rattling the window frame. You slide under the blankets, pulling them up to your chin, and listen to the building settle around you. Somewhere, water drips steadily into a basin. Somewhere else, footsteps echo down the hall. You close your eyes, and before sleep claims you, you think of tomorrow, not of the work to be done, but of the small, steady rituals that make it bearable. By morning, the frost has deepened on the inside of the window, curling into new shapes you don't remember seeing before. It's the kind of cold that makes every movement a negotiation. But staying under the blanket too long means the basin in the kitchen will freeze around the edges before you even start. You push yourself up, feet hitting the rug with a muffled thump, and wrap the shawl tighter around your shoulders. Somewhere down the hall, someone's coughing a harsh, dry sound that echoes in the stillness. The kettle is slow today. The coal in the stove is reluctant, needing coaxing with scraps of yesterday's newspaper. While you wait, you lay out the enamel mug, the chipped soap dish, the small tin of baking soda, and the comb. The comb's missing teeth make it feel older than it is, as if it survived not just years, but decades. And maybe it has. It was your mother's before it was yours. When the water finally steams, you pour some into the basin and add enough cold to make it usable. You lean over, cupping your hands to splash your face, feeling the heat and the sting mingle. The soap smells faintly of tar, harsh and utilitarian, and you work it quickly before rinsing. The towel is rough, but warm from hanging near the stove overnight. You rub your cheeks briskly until they tingle, then smear on a thin coat of cream. It's not much, but it's enough to stop the air from stripping the moisture from your skin before breakfast. Your hair is heavier this morning, as if it's been drinking in the dampness from the air. You drag the comb through slowly, section by section, untangling what the night has made of it. A single strand snaps, and you watch it drift to the floor before twisting the rest into a braid. The pins are cold when you secure them, but you know they'll warm as soon as you step outside, and the wind forces you to tuck your head deeper into your scarf. Clothes are the same as yesterday, but not in the way you admit to yourself. The blouse is aired overnight, but still carries the faintest trace of the tea you spilled 2 days ago, though the cardigan hides it well. The skirt hangs just as it did yesterday, heavy and unyielding, and the stockings are a map of stitched repairs. Pulling on the boots, you feel the familiar give in the right sole where the leather has worn thin. You've been meaning to patch it, but the days keep slipping away. The hallway smells faintly of boiled cabbage. Someone's already making their lunch. You avoid the bathroom queue again, catching the eye of a woman with damp hair wrapped in a towel. She looks tired in the way everyone looks tired here, but she smiles anyway. A brief flash of teeth before the door swings shut. On the tram, you wedge yourself between two women, each with their own quiet battle against the cold. One wears a coat mended at the elbows, the stitches neat but visible. The other clutches a handbag so small you can't imagine it, holding more than a comb and a coin purse. The smell in the tram is its own mixture: wool, damp leather, faint soap, and the mustiness of air that's been breathed by too many for too long. You spend the day with your sleeves rolled up, hands in and out of water, the skin growing redder as the hours pass. By the time you're heading home, you can feel the tightness in your knuckles, the way the skin wants to crack. A woman you recognize from another block walks with you for a few streets, and you talk about nothing. How the market has fewer onions this week. How the wind seems sharper than last year. These conversations are their own kind of warmth, brief as they are. Back inside, the first thing you do is light the stove. The air has that deep, sinking chill that clings to the walls, and it takes time to drive it back. While the kettle works again, you remove the boots, the stockings, the skirt, hanging each where they can air. The blouse will last another day. You smooth the fabric between your hands, feeling for crumbs or stray threads before placing it on the back of the chair. The evening wash is slower, not because you have more time, but because the warmth of the water is the only indulgence you get before bed. You wash your face, your arms, your neck, the water clouding faintly with the day's dust. You scrub your hands gently, careful not to open any cracks that might catch tomorrow. Dinner is simple bread, a slice of sausage that's more fat than meat, and tea. You eat slowly, staring at the steam rising from the cup, listening to the sound of footsteps in the hallway. Someone is laughing 2 doors down. Someone else is arguing over a pan. These sounds are as constant as the ticking of the small clock on the shelf. Later, you sit at the table and patch a pair of gloves. The thread is black, the gloves brown, but it doesn't matter. The holes are at the fingertips, where the fabric always gives first. Your stitches are uneven but tight, and you flex your hands to test them before setting the gloves aside. Before bed, you brush your hair again, this time slower, letting the weight of the day slip out with each pass of the comb. You rebraid it loosely, tucking the ends under so they don't snag on the pillow. The cream on your face feels cool now, settling into the skin as you slip under the blankets. The wind outside has picked up, moaning softly against the windows. You listen to it for a while, your hands tucked under your chin, before your eyes grow heavy. The last thing you feel is the rough weave of the blanket against your cheek, the faint smell of soap lingering from the evening wash, and the thought, half formed, but certain, that tomorrow will be much the same. And that's not entirely a bad thing. The morning comes with a dull, metallic light that filters through the frost-laced glass, as though the sun can't quite be bothered to rise properly today. You wake to the sound of the upstairs neighbor's radio, its tinny voice spilling down through the ceiling in a language that's more background noise than communication. The blanket clings to you with the damp warmth of sleep, but the air beyond it feels like a dare. You sit up slowly, letting the shawl fall around your shoulders, and watch your breath curl in front of your face for a moment before swinging your legs over the side of the bed. The floorboards are cold enough to bite, even through your socks. You shuffle into the kitchen, every movement careful to avoid disturbing the quiet rhythm of the building. The kettle sits waiting on the stove, last night's coal embers barely alive beneath a fine dusting of ash. You crouch, coaxing the fire to life again, adding a twist of paper and a small chunk of coal, watching as the first hesitant flames lick upward. The kettle begins to whisper long before it boils, a sound you've come to find strangely comforting. While the water heats, you prepare the basin for washing. A quick glance toward the small mirror tells you that your hair has given itself entirely to sleep, strands jutting at angles you couldn't recreate on purpose. You wet the comb first, the cold water prickling against your fingers, then begin the slow process of taming it into something that passes for neat. The comb catches in a knot, pulling a little too sharply, and you mutter under your breath, as if your hair might take offense and behave. When the kettle rattles, you pour some of the steaming water into the basin and dilute it with cold until it's just bearable. The soap smells faintly of pine this morning, a small mercy. You work it into a thin lather, scrubbing at your face, neck, and the crook of your elbows, the places where the day's grime always seems to settle first. The towel you use is the same one as yesterday, rough but reliable, the kind that leaves your skin tingling in a way that almost feels like health. Your blouse has survived another day without visible disaster, though you smooth it over carefully to check for crumbs or mysterious stains. The skirt is heavy but dependable, its hem brushing your calves as you move. You decide on the thicker stockings, knowing the wind will cut sharp today, and tug them up, adjusting the seam until it runs straight. The boots are stubborn this morning, the laces stiff from yesterday's damp air, but you manage to coax them into place without snapping the ends. Outside, the street has that washed-out stillness of winter mornings before too many feet have disturbed it. The tram stop feels emptier than usual, though the same woman with the mended coat stands 2 paces away, her breath clouding in rhythm with yours. She nods once in greeting, but doesn't speak, and you find you prefer it that way today. The tram arrives with a groan, and you step into the close, stale warmth of the carriage, the scent of wet wool and old paper mixing in the air. The workday is an endless series of small tasks, scrubbing, sorting, folding, each blending into the next, until you lose track of the hour. By mid-afternoon, your hands are raw again, small patches of skin near your knuckles turning a deeper red. You rub a little salve into them during your break, the smell of it sharp and medicinal, and you think fleetingly of your grandmother's hands, worn the same way. The return journey feels longer than the trip out, though the streets are busier now, filled with the clatter of boots and the murmur of tired voices. You walk the last few blocks with your head down, scarf pulled high over your mouth, the wind pushing against you as though trying to send you back. The building's door sticks, as it always does, and you shoulder it open, stepping into the dim, cabbage-scented hallway with a relief that's part physical, part mental. You light the stove almost without thinking, moving through the steps as if they're part of a ritual you've been performing your whole life. The kettle goes on first, then the bread onto a plate, a slice of sausage placed beside it. While the water heats for tea, you remove your boots and hang your skirt over the chair, giving it a little shake to release the day's dust. The stockings are draped near the stove, the heat easing the damp that's crept into the fibers. The basin comes out again, and you repeat the familiar sequence: warm water, soap, the slow peeling away of the day's weight from your skin. This time you linger, letting the warmth seep into your hands, your forearms, until the water begins to cool and the steam fades. You dry yourself carefully, mindful of the tender patches on your hands, then pull on the house cardigan, its elbows shiny from years of wear. Dinner is unhurried, though not elaborate. You slice the bread thinly to make it last, spreading a little butter on each piece before adding the sausage. The tea is strong, slightly bitter, but you drink it gratefully, feeling it settle warm in your chest. Outside, the wind rattles the windows, and you imagine the street beyond as an empty corridor, stretching away into the dark. Later, you bring out the small sewing kit again, this time to reinforce a button on your cardigan that's been threatening to escape for days. The thread is a near match to the fabric, and the satisfaction of pulling it snug is oddly comforting. You set the cardigan aside and take up your hairbrush, moving it slowly through your hair until it falls in a soft sheet down your back. You braid it loosely, fingers moving by habit rather than thought. As the stove burns lower, the room cools, shadows gathering in the corners. You fold your stockings for tomorrow, place your blouse where the morning light will find it, and blow out the small lamp on the table. Sliding under the blanket, you tuck your hands beneath your cheek, the smell of soap and coal smoke mixing in the air around you. Your eyes close to the sound of the wind outside, and for a moment, you imagine it carrying the day away entirely, leaving only the quiet behind. The day starts with the muted thump of someone's boots on the stairwell outside, a reminder that your building is alive long before you decide to be. You lie still for a while, listening to the soft crackle of the stoves cooling embers from the night before, the faint drip of condensation making its way down the window frame. Eventually, the thought of hot water is enough to make you push back the blanket, though the air greets you like a cold slap across the shins. You wrap your shawl tighter, the fringe brushing your wrists as you pad toward the stove. The kettle sits where you left it, a few smudges of soot at its base from yesterday's fire. You crouch, coaxing the embers with a careful breath, adding a twist of newspaper that flares briefly before surrendering to the coal's stubborn will. The fire wakes slowly, the same way you do, and by the time it's ready to boil the kettle, you've arranged the washing basin, set out the bar of soap, and resigned yourself to the fact that you'll never get used to how cold the water feels at first touch. You splash your face quickly, half for cleanliness, half to chase away the sleep that clings to the corners of your mind. The towel you press to your skin smells faintly of last night's smoke, and the rough fibers leave a pink flush across your cheeks. You take a moment to examine your hands. Small new cracks have formed near the knuckles overnight, the skin stretched too thin from yesterday's scrubbing. You'll have to be careful not to tear them open, though careful and wash basin rarely go hand in hand. Your blouse today is the blue one, the color faded to something gentler over years of washing. You smooth it over your shoulders, fastening the buttons one by one, each click a tiny act of preparation. The skirt is heavier than you'd like for the walk to work, but the fabric holds warmth, and that counts for more than elegance in this weather. Stockings are pulled up, seams straightened, boots laced with fingers that already feel the stiffness of the cold. Outside, the air has a wet edge to it, the kind that seeps into your coat no matter how tightly you button it. The tram stop is crowded this morning, a tangle of scarves and hunched shoulders, everyone trying to conserve their warmth. You stand slightly apart, watching the frost creep along the metal railing, turning it into something you know better than to touch. The tram arrives in its usual grumble of brakes and sigh of doors, and you step inside. The shift from cold to the stale heat of damp, wool hitting you all at once. The ride is uneventful. The scenery outside little more than a blur of gray buildings, and the occasional flash of someone's laundry strung between them. At work, the same tasks await: sorting, folding, washing, each one as familiar as the route you take to get there. By midday, your hands ache from the constant exposure to water and soap, the skin raw beneath your nails. You rub in a thin layer of salve during your short break, the medicinal smell briefly overpowering the scent of wet fabric that seems to cling to everything. The walk home is quieter than usual, though the streets are busier. A vendor is selling roasted chestnuts on the corner, their scent warm and sweet against the bite of the wind. You think about buying some, but the thought passes. Warmth in the moment doesn't outweigh the need to make what little you have last. Instead, you keep your pace steady, head bent against the gusts that push at you like a persistent hand. At home, the ritual begins again without thought. Boots off, skirt hung to air near the stove, kettle filled and set on the hob. The water hisses as it hits the bottom, the sound filling the small room in a way that feels companionable. You change into your house cardigan, the one with the mended cuffs, and set about preparing the basin again. The steam curls upward, blurring the edges of the mirror as you wash away the grit of the day. You take your time with your hands, letting them linger in the warmth until your fingers prune slightly. Dinner is simple: a piece of bread, a few slices of pickled vegetables, tea brewed strong enough to make you pause between sips. You eat slowly, savoring the small comfort of food that's both warm and familiar. Outside, the street sounds shift as people settle in for the night, the occasional laughter carrying up from somewhere below before fading into the murmur of voices behind closed doors. Later, you bring out the mending again, this time to work on a tear in your skirt's hem. The thread is slightly darker than the fabric, but it will do, and you stitch carefully, the rhythm of needle in and out as steady as breathing. You think about the women who must have done the same in this building decades ago, though historians still argue whether the exact style of stitching came from local tradition or was borrowed from elsewhere. When the repair is finished, you set the skirt aside and move to brush your hair, each stroke slow and deliberate, the sound of bristles on hair almost meditative. You braid it loosely, tucking the end beneath, so it doesn't unravel while you sleep. The stove's glow has softened by now, the heat low but steady, and you know it will hold until morning if you're lucky. You fold your clothes for tomorrow, placing them where they'll be easy to reach without leaving the warmth of the bed. The basin is emptied, the towel hung neatly over the chair, the kettle left full for morning. You blow out the lamp, letting the shadows fill the corners of the room, and slide under the blanket, curling into its weight. The wind is softer tonight, carrying with it the faint sound of someone playing a harmonica far away. You let it fade in and out, like waves on a shore you'll never see, until the rhythm becomes part of your breathing. The smell of coal, soap, and worn fabric surrounds you, a reminder that this small, carefully tended space is yours. And for now, it is enough. The morning begins before you're entirely ready for it. The kind of slow awakening where you hover between sleep and the sound of life, happening somewhere else in the building. Pipes groan faintly in the walls. Someone, 2 floors down, slams a cupboard, and there's the creak of a door being coaxed shut against a draft that never quite stays out. You stay under the blanket for a few more moments, eyes half closed, letting the faint warmth trapped inside cling to you before you break the seal and step into the bite of the room's air. Your feet meet the worn rug beside the bed, and you can feel the uneven weave beneath your toes. A thin shaft of light from the window cuts across the floor, landing on the small table where your basin waits. You fill it with water from the pitcher, the liquid splashing softly against enamel, sending a little mist into the air. The surface ripples, catching that strip of sunlight and breaking it into shards, and you pause just long enough to notice how the steam curls toward your face. You wash slowly, not because you're in any rush to stay in the cold, but because the basin's warmth is fleeting, and the moment it's gone, you'll be left with the chill prickling at your skin. The soap is the same plain bar you've used for months, its edges worn round from your grip, smelling faintly medicinal with a whisper of something like dried herbs. You work it between your palms until there's enough lather to pass over your face, neck, and arms, the rhythm automatic. The towel you dry off with has gone stiff in places, the fabric not quite soft anymore, but it does its job. Dressing feels like building a small fortress against the outside world. Undergarments first, their edges smoothed carefully so they don't bunch under the heavier layers. A wool skirt, still holding the faint crease from where it was folded last night. The blouse that needs a little coaxing at the buttons, where the thread has stretched from years of wear. Over it all, your cardigan, the one with a patch over the left elbow that you stitched yourself crooked but sturdy. By the time you pull on your boots, you can already hear the faint rumble of the tram in the distance, the sound carrying through the morning stillness. You step outside, and the air hits you in the chest, a dry cold that makes you instinctively draw your scarf higher. Your breath puffs out ahead of you in quick bursts, and you keep your head down as you walk, partly to block the wind, partly to avoid stepping into the puddles that have frozen into irregular glassy shapes overnight. The tram ride today feels longer than usual, perhaps because the car is especially full. You stand pressed between two women, both holding bags that smell faintly of yesterday's bread. One is talking in low tones about her neighbor who washes her hair only twice a month, something you pretend not to overhear, but can't quite help catching pieces of. Historians still argue whether such infrequent washing was entirely due to water shortages, or whether it lingered as a holdover from older pre-war habits. You just know that, in winter, steam in the basin is worth more than the scent of roses. At work, the washroom greets you with the familiar dampness in the air, the scent of laundry soap and wet cloth clinging to every surface. Your hands sink into water that's already clouded with soap, and you begin the rhythm of scrubbing, rinsing, wringing out, hanging up. The muscles in your forearms warm with the motion, though your fingers stay chilled, the skin tightening against your nails. You think briefly about gloves, but gloves get in the way. And besides, everyone here works barehanded. Midday arrives, and you perch on a small wooden crate with your lunch. Bread, a wedge of cheese, a little jar of pickled carrots. You eat slowly, watching the way steam curls from the cup of tea you've poured from your thermos. The sound of the others talking around you blends into a soft hum. Someone tells a joke about the government distributing official soap rations, scented like cabbage, and you laugh more at the delivery than the joke itself. The afternoon stretches in much the same way, each task blending into the next, until the shapes of the garments you handle are more familiar than the lines of your own hands. When the day ends, you pull on your coat again, the lining cold against your skin at first, and step out into air that smells faintly of chimney smoke. The streets are wet from a thaw that's now freezing over again, and the slick cobblestones demand slow, deliberate steps. Passing the corner shop, you pause at the window. There are small displays, canned fish, tins of condensed milk, a pyramid of soap bars wrapped in brown paper. You remember when you last bought one and decide to make the next one stretch another week, even if it means the scent fades entirely. The shopkeeper is sweeping the threshold, and you exchange a brief nod before continuing on. At home, the room feels colder than usual. You set down your things and go straight to the stove, kneeling to stir the ashes and coax the embers back to life. The small flame flickers reluctantly before catching on a twist of dry paper, and you feed it slowly until you can hear the faint hiss of water beginning in the kettle. While it heats, you prepare the basin for your evening wash, measuring out just enough warm water to make it bearable. The act of washing at night feels different, less about freshness, more about shaking off the weight of the day. You clean your face first, then your hands, letting them linger in the water until the ache eases a little. The towel is warm from its place near the stove, and you press it against your skin longer than necessary, breathing in the mingled scents of smoke and soap. Dinner tonight is modest barley porridge with a drizzle of honey saved from last month's ration. You eat it standing near the stove, feeling the heat on your shins, the kind that doesn't last, but makes the moment bearable. The quiet is complete now, broken only by the kettle's soft whistle, which you answer by making a cup of tea strong enough to leave faint rings in the enamel mug. Later, you sit with your mending, though tonight it's a pair of stockings rather than a skirt. The tear is small, but in a place that will grow quickly if ignored, so you thread your needle with fine yarn, matching the color as best you can in lamplight. Your stitches are uneven, but they hold, and in the end, that's all that matters. The rhythm of the needle calms you, each pass through the fabric like the ticking of a clock. Once the repair is finished, you brush out your hair, counting the strokes in your head. The bristles pull gently at your scalp, and you find yourself slowing down, the day's edges softening. You braid your hair loosely again, tucking the end beneath as before, and set the brush aside. The stove is glowing low now, its warmth barely reaching your side of the room, and you decide to bank it early, knowing the cold will be sharper in the morning otherwise. You fold tomorrow's clothes neatly, placing them within arm's reach. Then pour the leftover warm water from the kettle into the basin so it's ready to reheat. The lamp is turned down until the room is only shapes and shadows, and you slide beneath the blanket, curling into its familiar embrace. Somewhere outside, a bicycle bell rings faintly, followed by the muffled sound of a dog barking twice before settling. You let those small noises carry you, each one a thread weaving into the fabric of sleep. Your body is tired in the deep, satisfying way that comes from work well done, and your mind drifts, already loosening its hold on the day. You breathe in the faint, clean scent of soap still clinging to your skin, and as your eyes close, you think only of warmth and the quiet certainty that tomorrow will begin much the same way. Morning breaks in a thin, pale wash of light that creeps across the wall before touching the bed. You are aware of it before you open your eyes, the way it shifts the darkness into something softer, less absolute. The blanket is heavy over you, holding the last of the night's warmth, and you hesitate before letting the cold air in. Somewhere beyond the walls, a door closes with a low thud, and footsteps cross the hallway, slow, measured steps that fade toward the stairs. You push the blanket back, feeling the chill run instantly along your arms, and swing your legs to the floor. The rug beneath your feet is rough this morning, the fibers still holding yesterday's dust, despite the quick beating you gave it in the evening. The pitcher on the table is half full, the water inside catching that narrow strip of sunlight and throwing it back in small, shifting flashes as you pour it into the basin. The first splash is startlingly cold, enough to send a shiver down your spine, but you steady yourself, dipping your hands in and cupping the water to your face. The shock wakes you fully. You work the soap into your palms until it froths, rubbing it gently over your skin, the faint herbal scent rising like a reminder of something green and growing, though the world outside is still winterbound. The towel, cool and slightly damp at the edges, leaves your cheeks tingling as you dry them. You dress slowly, mindful of the layering undershirt, blouse, skirt, cardigan, each piece, adding a thin shield against the air that seeps through every crack in the building. The scarf is last, wrapped twice around your neck before you step into your boots. The street greets you with a gust that seems determined to slip under your coat, no matter how tightly you close it. The tram is already visible at the far end of the road, a squat, boxy shape moving through the morning mist. Your breath clouds ahead of you as you walk quickly to meet it, careful on the slick cobblestones where thin sheets of ice still cling. Inside, the air is thick with the smells of damp wool and faint smoke clinging to people's coats. You stand near the back, one hand gripping the rail, your other tucked into your coat pocket for warmth. The ride passes in fragments. A man muttering to himself over a folded newspaper. A woman tapping her fingers against the strap of her bag in a slow, steady rhythm. The tram bell clanging as you approach each stop. By the time you reach your stop, the sky has shifted from pale gray to a muted blue, though the sun is still hidden somewhere behind the buildings. Work begins as it always does, the air in the washroom carrying that familiar mixture of steam, soap, and damp cloth. You take your place at the basin. The water already warm from the first load someone else has worked through. The motions come without thought. Scrub, rinse, wring, hang, and your body finds its own rhythm. Hands working faster than your mind can follow. The fabric under your fingers is sometimes coarse, sometimes fine, but always heavy with water. And the ache in your wrists starts before the first hour passes. Around you, voices rise and fall. Two women argue quietly about whether the market will have potatoes this week. Another hums tunelessly under her breath as she works. The sound of dripping water is constant, punctuated by the occasional sharp slap of wet cloth against the side of a basin. You lose yourself in it. The way the noise forms a kind of background that lets you think of other things, what you will eat for lunch, whether the shop will still have the better kind of tea by the time you finish work, if the patch on your cardigan will hold another month. When midday comes, you wipe your hands dry on the edge of your apron and step outside for air. The sky has cleared, though the sun is weak and the wind has picked up. You sit on the same crate you use every day, your lunch wrapped neatly in cloth, bread with a smear of butter, a small jar of pickled beets, and an apple whose skin is slightly wrinkled but still sweet. The others cluster nearby in their own small groups, trading pieces of news or passing around bits of food. Someone offers you half a boiled egg, and you accept it with quiet thanks. The afternoon stretches, each task blurring into the next, until the sound of the whistle signals the end of the day. Your hands are sore, the skin rough and red from the water, but you pull on your coat and step back into the chill with a sense of relief. The streets are busier now, lined with people heading home or to the shops before they close. You pass the bakery and catch a faint whiff of bread still warm from the oven, but the queue is long and your coins are few, so you keep walking. At the small shop near your building, you pause to look at the display again. The tins of milk are still stacked in their careful pyramid, and there are 2 bars of soap left on the shelf. You consider buying one, but decide to wait another day. The shopkeeper greets you with a nod as he counts coins into a woman's palm, his lips moving silently with the numbers. You leave without speaking, the cold quickening your steps toward home. Inside, the room feels close and still, the air faintly scented with the remains of last night's fire. You set down your things and kneel to coax the embers back to life. The stove resists at first, but with enough paper and kindling it catches, the flames licking at the small logs you feed it. The kettle goes on, and while it begins its slow warm, you set up the basin for your evening wash. The water is warmer tonight, and you take your time with it, letting your hands soak before you begin. You wash your face, neck, and arms, then your hands again, the warmth easing the stiffness in your joints. The towel has been resting near the stove and feels almost luxurious against your skin. Dinner is simple, a small portion of barley soup with shreds of carrot, eaten slowly as you stand near the stove's glow. Afterward, you take up your mending again, this time a seam that has come loose along the hem of your skirt. The needle slides in and out of the fabric with a steady rhythm, and the quiet of the room wraps around you. Outside, you can hear the muffled sound of a cart rattling over the stones, the driver calling to his horse. The lamp light pools over your work, leaving the corners of the room in shadow. When the skirt is repaired, you fold it neatly and place it with tomorrow's clothes. The kettle has boiled again, so you pour the water into a jar to keep for the morning. You brush your hair, counting each stroke until the strands fall smooth over your shoulders, then braid it loosely and tuck it away. The stove is burning low now, casting a faint orange light across the floor. You add one last piece of wood and bank it, knowing it will smolder through the night. The blanket is cold when you first climb in, but you curl tightly, drawing it close until your body begins to warm it. Somewhere in the distance, a clock chimes the hour, the sound carrying through the quiet. You close your eyes, listening as it fades, and let the day dissolve into the kind of stillness that comes only at night, when the work is done and the world beyond your walls has nothing left to ask of you. You wake to the muted sound of snow falling. It is not something you hear so much as feel, a hush that settles over everything, softening the edges of the world. The window glass is faintly misted from your breath through the night, and you wipe it with your palm to see outside. The street is a pale ribbon, lined with the hunched backs of buildings dusted in white. There are no tracks yet, not from carts or boots, just the even, undisturbed layer laid down by the night. You dress more quickly this morning, the cold sharp enough to make you rush through each step. The scarf is wound tighter, the boots laced with firmer knots. The kettle on the stove gives up a thin cloud of steam as you pour water into a chipped mug, the tea inside faint but warm. You drink it standing, feeling it trace heat down into your chest, and then gather your things for the walk to work. The air bites at your face the moment you step outside, but the quiet of the snow makes up for it. The sound of your boots crunching in the fresh powder seems impossibly loud in the stillness. You pass the bakery and smell nothing The chimneys are bare, no heat rising yet, so perhaps they have not lit their ovens. A single man walks ahead of you, his long coat swaying slightly, leaving deep, solitary prints for you to step into. By the time you reach the tram stop, a handful of others have gathered, their faces red from the cold, their breath pluming in front of them. The tram arrives with a squeal of metal on rails, a sound almost shocking in the muffled morning. Inside, the windows are fogged over, the heat barely reaching the back. You find a place near the door, the handle icy against your glove. The ride is slower today, the tracks slick beneath the wheels, but no one complains. Most stand in silence, eyes half-lidded, rocking gently with the motion. A boy no older than 12 sits with a basket on his knees, the cloth over it shifting slightly with whatever is inside. He watches you without smiling, then looks away when you meet his gaze. Work begins in the same familiar way, though the basins feel even colder now that your hands have been warmed by the ride. The steam rises in pale coils, and soon the air thickens with damp heat that fogs your skin. The chatter is muted this morning, voices low, perhaps in respect for the way the snow has slowed everything down. You work steadily, each piece of cloth passing from your hands to the line, dripping onto the floor in slow, measured drops. At midday, you step outside and find the snow still falling. It clings to your hair and coat, melting almost as soon as it touches. Your lunch is the same as yesterday, though the apple is softer, its skin giving slightly under your teeth. A man selling roasted chestnuts has set up near the corner, the smell rich and tempting. But you only watch him for a moment before turning back to your meal. The afternoon drags, with the weight of the weather pressing in on the building. The windows are fogged so thoroughly you can barely see the outline of the street outside. Your fingers ache from the cold water, but the work does not stop. The pile of laundry seems endless, as if the snow outside has drawn more from the city's corners, sending them here to be cleaned. When the whistle blows, the relief is sharp and immediate. You step outside to find the snow finally easing, the light dimming toward evening. The street is quieter than usual, the shops half empty, their windows lit, but drawing in few customers. You walk home slowly, your boots sinking into the softened paths, and pass a group of children rolling a ball of snow larger than any of them, their laughter breaking the stillness like bright glass. The room is cold when you enter, the air unmoved since morning. You set down your things and go straight to the stove, coaxing a fire from the embers left overnight. The kettle goes on again, the sound of the water beginning to stir, filling the silence. You change into a heavier sweater before settling near the stove to warm your hands. Dinner is a slice of bread with a smear of butter and the last of the barley soup, reheated slowly. You eat without hurry, watching the flames shift and collapse in on themselves. Outside, the streetlights flicker into life, their halos small and uncertain in the falling dusk. Later, you take out a shirt with a frayed collar, working your needle along the worn edge with small, careful stitches. The fabric is soft from age, almost too thin in places, but you make the repairs all the same. The quiet is deep, broken only by the occasional crack from the stove. When the shirt is folded and put away, you boil more water, pouring some into the basin for a quick wash. The warmth against your skin is welcome after the cold of the day. You dry your hands slowly, letting the towel linger over the places where the skin has cracked. The bed is no warmer than the air, but the blanket is heavy, and you pull it close around you. The sound of snow resumes outside, faint but steady, and you listen to it until your breathing matches its rhythm. The last thing you notice before sleep is the soft glow from the stove's embers, a quiet red pulse in the dark. The morning comes dim and gray, the snow deep enough to cover the lowest step outside your door. You push it aside with your boot, the powder scattering like dust. The air is sharper today, cutting into your lungs when you breathe deeply. You wrap your scarf higher over your face before stepping onto the street. The tram is late, delayed by the snow on the tracks, and the crowd at the stop shifts restlessly. A woman complains under her breath about being late for her shift, her words vanishing into the cold. When the tram finally arrives, it is already crowded, the air thick with the smell of wet wool and smoke clinging to coats. You squeeze into a narrow space between two men, their shoulders pressed into yours. Work is harder today. The deliveries are heavier, the cloth stiffer from the cold. Your fingers feel clumsy, slow to wring the water from each piece. The steam fogs your vision, and the air feels close despite the chill that creeps in through the cracks in the walls. You keep moving, knowing the rhythm will carry you through. At midday, the snow has stopped, leaving the city under a muted light that flattens every shadow. You eat quickly, the bread tougher than usual, the tea lukewarm. A cart passes, its wheels creaking under the weight of sacks piled high, the driver hunched low against the cold. The afternoon passes in the same quiet rhythm, the sound of water and cloth and low voices filling the space. The ache in your hands deepens, but you do not stop until the final whistle. Outside, the sky is already dim, the snow turning to a thin crust underfoot. Home is a welcome sight, the small room familiar and waiting. You light the stove, the warmth spreading slowly outward, and pour water for tea. The evening passes in small tasks, mending a torn glove, wiping the dust from the table, straightening the folded clothes in the corner. When night comes, you sit for a while by the stove, watching the flames until your eyes grow heavy. You bank the fire carefully, then slip beneath the blanket, the cold held at bay by the layers you've built. The quiet outside is complete, the snow sealing the city into a softer, slower shape, and you let it carry you into sleep. The morning begins before the sun has properly risen, the faintest hint of pale blue filtering through the frost-covered window. The air is so cold, it seems to sting the inside of your nose when you breathe. You lie still for a moment beneath the blanket, weighing the small comfort of warmth against the inevitability of leaving it behind. Finally, you push the covers aside and swing your feet to the floor, the boards icy under your soles. The stove has long gone cold. You crouch beside it, coaxing the coals into a reluctant glow before feeding it kindling, listening to the dry crackle that grows into a steady flame. You stand close, holding your hands out until the skin tingles. The kettle takes its place above the heat, and you watch it for a moment, the slow beginnings of steam curling upward. Outside, the snow has stopped, but the world is locked in ice. The rooftops are a dull white under the early light, and the street is quiet. You dress in your thickest layers, fingers stiff as you work the buttons through their loops. The scarf smells faintly of smoke from nights before, a comfort in its own way. The tram is again late, its delay unremarkable in this weather. The small group at the stop shifts and stamps their feet in an unspoken effort to stay warm. Breath hangs in the air, drifting away in thin clouds. When the tram finally arrives, it groans under the strain of the cold, the metal frame shuddering as it slows. Inside, every seat is taken, and you stand near the door, one gloved hand gripping the pole. The windows are completely clouded over, so you can only guess at the streets passing by. The conductor moves through the car collecting fares, his coat collar turned high, a pencil stub tucked behind his ear. You hand over the coins without speaking. Work is much the same, though the water in the basins feels sharper today, as if it bites through the skin to the bone. You work faster at first, trying to generate some heat through movement, but the cold is patient, creeping in no matter how you push against it. The others keep their heads down, their breath puffing in small bursts over the tubs. Conversation is sparse, the work itself demanding most of your attention. By midday, you're grateful for even the thin soup that's been brought in. It's served in tin bowls that do little to hold the heat, so you eat quickly. The bread is dense and cool, the crust hard enough that you press it against the side of the bowl to soften it. You sit near the small window at the back, where the frost gathers thickest, and watch the thin trickle of people passing outside. The afternoon's work is slower, the pile never seeming to diminish. Your hands are red and raw by the time the whistle blows. The sound is sharper in the cold, carrying far into the street beyond. You peel off the wet gloves and replace them with dry ones before stepping outside. The air is brutally cold now that the light is fading. The street lamps flicker into life, casting small circles of orange on the snow. You walk quickly, keeping your head down, boots crunching in the hardened surface. The city feels quieter than usual, the usual hum dampened by the weather. At home, the first thing you do is light the stove again. The warmth takes time to build, so you keep your coat on while you prepare the evening meal. Tonight it's potatoes boiled until they begin to fall apart, sprinkled with a little salt. You eat slowly, letting the steam warm your face before setting the empty plate aside. The evening passes with small chores. You sweep the floor, shake the crumbs from the blanket, and mend a tear in your other scarf. Outside, the wind has risen, brushing against the window in steady, searching gusts. You bank the fire carefully before settling into bed, curling against the cold. Sleep comes in fits, the wind pulling you back toward waking again and again. When morning comes, the room feels even colder than the day before. You dress quickly, eating a crust of bread on your way out the door. The sky is low and gray, heavy with the promise of more snow. The tram ride is slow, the wheels squealing against the ice, but eventually you arrive. The day's work begins without ceremony. You move through the motions almost without thought, the rhythm familiar enough to carry you forward. At midday, the snow begins again, fine and light, swirling in the wind outside the window. The sight is both beautiful and exhausting. You know it means another slow, cold journey home. By the time you leave, the snow has thickened into something heavier. The flakes cling to your coat and hair, melting slowly into cold dampness. You walk with your shoulders hunched, head bent forward, boots pressing a path into the softening ground. Home is a relief, though it takes time for the chill to leave your bones. You light the stove and sit close, hands extended, until your skin prickles with heat. Dinner is a simple stew of whatever is left, bits of carrot, potato, and a thin broth. You eat with the quiet satisfaction of having made it through another day. Later, you take out the small box of sewing supplies and work on a shirt with loose buttons. The light from the stove is enough to see by, and the soft snap of the thread through the fabric is oddly calming. The night passes without much thought, the snow still falling outside, burying the city in silence. The next day begins the same way, cold, quiet, the slow preparation for work. The snow is deeper now, and your steps sink halfway to the ankle as you make your way to the tram stop. The crowd there is smaller, perhaps because some have decided not to brave the weather at all. Inside the tram, the air is thick with the dampness of melting snow. The windows drip with condensation, and the smell of wool and wet leather fills the space. You stand near the back, swaying with the motion as the tram moves forward. Work is slower today. The deliveries are late, and for a time there's little to do but wait. When the baskets finally arrive, you and the others set to work with renewed focus. The hours pass in a haze of water and steam, the cold at your back, and the heat of the tubs at your front. By the time the whistle blows, the snow outside has eased, leaving a stillness that feels almost heavy. The walk home is quiet, the only sound the creak of ice beneath your boots. Inside, the stove welcomes you again, its heat slow but steady. You make tea and sit for a while, listening to the faint sounds from the street below, boots on snow, a distant cart, the muffled call of a vendor closing up for the night. Dinner is a modest affair, but it's warm and filling. You eat slowly, watching the fire as it burns down. Later, take a book from the small stack by your bed and read by the shifting light until the words blur. The stove's last embers glow faintly as you drift into sleep. The days begin to blur together. Each morning is a repetition of the last. Wake to the cold, dress in layers, make your way to the tram, work until your fingers ache, return home to the small comfort of the stove. The snow comes and goes, but the cold remains, a constant presence in every breath and movement. One evening, as you are returning home, you pass by the bakery and see that the ovens are lit again, a warm glow spilling onto the street. The smell is intoxicating after days without it. You stand for a moment, letting it fill you before moving on. That night, you dream of warmth, not of the stove, but of summer heat, the kind that settles into your skin and stays there. In the dream, the streets are dry, the air alive with sound, and you walk without a coat, the sun pressing against your back. You wake to the cold, but the dream lingers, a small ember in the dark. The next morning, the snow has stopped entirely, leaving the streets in a hard, glittering crust. The air is clear, and the sound of boots on ice is sharper than before. You move carefully, each step deliberate, until you reach the tram stop. The ride is quicker today, the tracks clear enough for speed. Work feels lighter for no particular reason. The hours pass without the usual drag, and you find yourself humming under your breath as you move through the tasks. At midday, you eat with more appetite than you've had in days. The walk home is almost pleasant, the sky holding a faint blush of light, even as evening settles. You light the stove as usual, prepare your meal, and sit by the fire until the warmth seeps into you completely. The night passes quietly, and for the first time in many days, the cold does not seem quite so heavy.